what is the reality of being YouTube's biggest content creator? Well, becoming a full-time YouTuber is a little like having a bar fight. There's some highs, there's some lows, but by the end of the adventure, you either end up an alcoholic or face down on the floor. Many people never get to the point of making their content a full-time gig, but for the lucky few that do, they're fortunate enough to have a lucrative and unique job opportunity that I would only compare to being maybe a drug cartel or an OnlyFans creator. But today I want to focus on the best of the best, the 0.001%. So without further ado, here is the reality of being YouTube's biggest content creator. Now in this video, I'm going to talk about two specific creators that really were and are the equivalent of Jesus Christ in their own eras of YouTube. PewDiePie and Penguin Z0 or Moist Critical. Now don't get me wrong, there are absolutely bigger content creators out there, for example, Mr. Beast. But the content creators that I'm talking about today are unique because they focus on their personality instead of the content that they're making the video on. In other words, you probably won't see Mr. Beast make a 13-minute video about being a dildo god. As much as I'd like to see something like that, fuck, wouldn't we all want to see something like that? Now with that out of the way, let's get into the first piece of reality that the biggest content creator on the site has to deal with. Number one, you make the algorithm. By far, one of the best parts of being the biggest content creator on YouTube is that you're basically playing God, man. Everybody follows you, nobody questions what you say. It's basically like being a dictator. What you say goes, nobody questions anything. Now, some of you might not know this or might even be too young to remember this, which is a fucking wild statement to even think about. But back in the day when PewDiePie was in his heyday, his era of 2018, when he was really on top of the internet, everybody knew his name, he had this series that he called Lawai. And basically what that series was is that he would react to fan submitted memes in his subreddit. Now, what this ended up doing was spawning a colossally huge apocalyptic wave of content creators doing the exact same thing. There was Lawai clones all across the horizon. I mean, even names like Pyrocynical, he had a Lawai clone. It was called ASOT. All those British YouTubers, Memulus, Will and E, the other one that I can't remember the name of. Basically, long story short, everybody was doing it. It was the trend to do. And the copycat Lawais honestly went on for like 3 years after it originally started. Now, this always happened to PewDiePie in his career. He was a very series-oriented YouTuber, so a lot of people ended up following and doing the trends that he was doing, following his series, copying it and making it their own, you know? It's funny because almost everything he did, it just instantly became the meta. Now, in the case of Moist Critical, it's a little different, but more or less the same idea. Since Moist Critical is really diverse and has content that's all over the place, he doesn't really have a series that he always goes back to, so people can't really copy him in that aspect. However, I'm sure as a viewer, you've probably noticed video titles like these popping up everywhere, or maybe thumbnails like this popping up everywhere. There's a reason for that. Moist Critical, baby. I think it's interesting, especially because both content creators, PewDiePie and Moist Critical, have kind of really shaped the YouTube landscape as to what the meta is when it comes to making videos. You think back in the day with PewDiePie, it was mostly reactionary content, stuff in the thumbnails, YouTube faces going crazy, bulging your eyes as wide as possible in the thumbnails. That's what was working back then. Now, if you look at the scape of YouTube today, with Moist Critical being at kind of the helm of YouTube, guiding the meta, it's very different because his content is very different from what it used to be in 2016. Simplicity has really taken over, and it's very rare for YouTubers to even showcase their faces in the thumbnails anymore. It's been interesting to see how that's changed over the years, though. Now let's get into the second reality of being YouTube's biggest content creator. All eyes are on you. Now this of course could be a bad or a good thing. Of course, nobody wants to get caught with their pants around their ankles. You know, everybody dunking on them in the comments, whether it be through a controversy or something like that. But at the same time, as a very huge content creator, you're in a very unique position. Because these content creators have such a large audience, it's super easy for them to bring attention to a cause that they have interest in. So thinking of, say, YouTube issues, both content creators, Moist Critical and PewDiePie, have talked about YouTube issues, and they've brought a lot of attention to it. Or in a more extreme example, I know I said I wasn't going to talk about him, but Mr. Beast and Team Trees. When you have such a huge audience that listens to everything you say, you have the potential to do really anything. Going back to the bad side of it though, it's equally not a good thing either. Because there is without a doubt an 100% chance that everybody is going to look into everything you do and with a fine-tooth comb and try and pick something out they don't like. Or you're going to have psychology majors on Twitter think they're the next mind reader and just analyze every single thing you do. So for example, if you look at PewDiePie, it was mostly mainstream media that he was fighting with. I mean, the Wall Street Journal, every major journalistic site was tussling with him at the time. I don't think anybody's used tussling in the last 1300 years, but we're going with it. That was a constant battle with PewDiePie's career. He always had to fight with mainstream media. They would look into every single thing he did and just try to find something they didn't like, something they could write an article about. In Moist Critical's case, it's not as extreme because being a YouTuber these days and getting filthy fucking rich off of it isn't that big of a deal as it was about a decade ago. So mainstream media really isn't paying any attention to him. And when you have figures like Mr. Beast and others similar to him with huge size subscriber counts, it's not a surprise that the mainstream media isn't really paying attention. But don't worry, another player enters the ring, and it's called Twitter. Most recently, for example, people were looking at Critical and how he approached Logan Paul in the Mr. Beast video. So yeah, even though you have a huge audience as YouTube's biggest creator, you also have to deal with the drawbacks of that. And of course, the bad isn't always outweighing the good and vice versa. Now, the third reality that you gotta deal with if you're the YouTube biggest content creator out there, that wasn't English, is that you can make content on whatever you possibly want. Now, as a big YouTuber, you're lucky because as you slowly have peaked throughout the years, you've tried really hard to get to where you are now. You've focused on making every video as good as it possibly can get, and now you're at the point where you could just coast. You can make content on whatever you want. People are gonna watch you no matter what, even if it's just a video of you sitting and watching TLC episodes for 40 minutes or something like that. Obviously, there's no hate to content creators here because it takes a obscene amount of work to get there. But I just think it's interesting that just because we've been watching a content creator for so long, or because they're very well known on the site, people are willing to watch them no matter what they do. I think of it personally like if a small content creator like my size was doing TLC content where they just watched the entire 40-minute episode and, you know, occasionally talked about it here and there throughout the video, it wouldn't do well at all. Nobody would give a shit, and I wouldn't blame them. But it's interesting that big content creators can make content like this, and you see that with Moist Critical specifically. I mean, you wouldn't think that him and his editing style would do really well because he doesn't do any editing. He just cuts the clips together, just talks. There's no background music or anything like that. By all definition of what makes content good today, his content shouldn't be doing well. But I think it's kind of like a snowball effect where time goes on, people start to learn his name and get used to his content and kind of hear what jokes he's capable of, and they're more willing to sit down and listen to his videos. And I personally find both of them equally as entertaining. So now you know the reality of being YouTube's biggest content creator. I always think it's really interesting to see when YouTube basically has a new spokesperson at the helm. I mean, Moist Critical is like PewDiePie in a lot of ways, just with less N-words. Their content is very heavily focused on their personality, and I think that's what's really kind of elevated them to the top of what they are now. The YouTube meta is constantly going to be changing throughout the years. I mean, I'm interested to see what the next meta is, and I'm also curious to see who's kind of the new spokesperson in the 2030s, because I gotta say, in the 2020s, it's probably going to be Moist Critical the entire way through. Similar to how PewDiePie was the spokesperson for most of the 2010s. Anyway, this video was super short. I just wanted to talk about it. I'll see you guys later.